Eleanor Dawson always woke up before the sun. At 63, her internal clock didn't need alarms. The early hours were hers and hers alone, filled with stillness and the soft whistle of a kettle coming to life. For most of her adult life, mornings had been a shared ritual with her husband, Henry, 2 mugs of black tea, a slice of toast with marmalade, and the day's newspaper spread between them like a treaty. But that was before the heart attack. Before the silence settled into the corners of their modest cottage in the rolling hills of Devonshire like dust that refused to be swept away. It had been 9 years since Henry passed, and though the grief was no longer sharp, it remained, a slow ache that hummed beneath Eleanor's bones. On this particular October morning, the world outside her kitchen window looked like a painting, copper leaves swirling in the wind, mist curling over the hedgerows. The kind of morning Henry used to photograph. She sat down with her tea and glanced, not for the first time, at the framed photo above the mantel, a picture of them on their 30th anniversary. Her hair was still dark then. His smile still full. Their son, Benjamin, was grown now, living in London with his own family. They spoke rarely. There had been a falling out after Henry's funeral, nothing explosive, but layered with years of misunderstanding and unsaid things. Eleanor had tried to mend the rift, but pride, hers and his, always got in the way. She took a sip of tea, trying to push the thought aside, and opened the local paper. But the news was dull: council elections, rising petrol prices, a fox spotted in a Tesco parking lot. She folded it shut with a sigh. The silence in the house pressed in again. Later that morning, she found herself on the village bus, riding into the market town of Tisbury. She told herself she needed bread and a few things for supper, but really, she just wanted not to be alone. Tisbury was bustling. Children in Halloween costumes started between stalls, and the scent of roasted chestnuts floated through the crisp air. Eleanor wandered past shop windows without much interest until she stopped in front of a store she hadn't noticed in years. Time-worn treasures, a curious little antiques and second-hand shop nestled between a bakery and a florist. Its window display was a charming chaos: tarnished silver spoons, vintage hats, porcelain dolls with chipped cheeks. Something about it tugged at her. She pushed the door open, and the smell of old books and lavender soap drifted out to greet her. Inside, the store was like a museum of forgotten stories. Shelves of cracked leather-bound novels. Tea sets missing saucers. Vinyl records from another era. Eleanor moved slowly, her fingertips trailing along shelves like a reader skimming braille. Then, on a bottom shelf behind a stack of dusty frames, she spotted it. An old box camera. Its leather was worn and cracked, the metal edges dulled by time, but the lens looked intact. She picked it up gently, as if it might crumble in her hands. It was heavier than she expected. "Lovely piece, isn't it?" The voice came from behind her. A young woman, no older than 30, stood behind the counter, watching her with a warm smile. "Do you know if it works?" Eleanor asked. "Not sure," the woman replied. "It's been here a while. Came in with a box of things from an estate sale. £15, if you're interested." Eleanor hesitated. She didn't need a camera. She didn't even own film. But something about it, its weight, its presence, reminded her of Henry. Of his hobby, his quiet joy in capturing moments. "All right," she said, surprising herself. "I'll take it." Back at home, she placed the groceries on the counter and sat with the camera at her small dining table. The house felt warmer now, somehow. She examined the box carefully, her hands remembering Henry's lessons about film cameras. When she opened the back, her breath caught. There was a roll of film still inside. Old, dusty, and likely expired, but untouched. She sat in silence for a long moment. What stories had this camera held? Over the next few days, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about it. She found an old photography shop in Salisbury, one of the last places in the county that still developed film. She called them. "If the roll hasn't been exposed to light, there's a chance we can process it," the technician said. "Bring it in. We'll see what we can do." So she did. As she handed the camera to the man behind the counter, her heart thudded with a nervous excitement she hadn't felt in years. A part of her knew the film might be ruined. But another part, the part that hadn't stopped hoping, dared to believe it might not be. He told her it would take about a week. In that time, Eleanor kept busy. She took walks in the woods. She baked a plum tart. She even drafted a letter to Benjamin she never sent. The camera sat on her mantle, like a relic from another life. A week later, the shop called. The film's developed, the voice on the line said. You might want to come in. There was something in the tone, curiosity, maybe even awe, that made Eleanor's stomach flip. She picked up the photographs in a small brown envelope. The technician didn't say much, only offered her a quiet, take your time. Back home, Eleanor sat down, the envelope unopened in her lap. The house was silent, but her heart roared. She took a breath and slid the prints out. The first few were faded and blurred, shadows of rooftops, trees, a cat on a windowsill. Then came a photo that made her gasp. It was her. Eleanor. Sitting on a park bench, decades younger, looking directly at the camera and smiling. She wore a green scarf, Henry's favorite one on her. The background was unmistakable, St. James Park in London. She turned to the next photo. Another. Her at a garden party. Laughing. Glass of wine in hand. And another, her and Henry, dancing in the kitchen, barefoot. It must have been taken from outside the window. Her hands trembled. She blinked hard. This wasn't just someone's film roll. This was her life. Captured in moments she had no memory of being photographed. She wasn't sure how it was possible. But the answer, she knew, would change everything. Eleanor sat in stunned silence, the photographs spread across her lap like puzzle pieces from a dream she didn't remember having. The images were unmistakably hers, moments from decades ago, places she knew, expressions she hadn't seen on her own face in years. There was something haunting and comforting about them. They weren't posed. They weren't staged. They were real. Moments between moments. A soft smile while she read in a park. A candid laugh with her sister on the porch. Henry reaching across a picnic blanket to brush a strand of hair behind her ear. And then, there was that one. Eleanor and Henry, standing at the edge of a seaside cliff, arms around each other, wind in their hair, eyes closed. She had no memory of it being taken. Yet it captured something so intimate, so raw, that she found herself holding her breath. Who had taken these photos? Why were they still hidden in a thrifted camera, left to dust and time? And how had the camera found its way back to her? That night, Eleanor barely slept. Her thoughts looped in restless circles. She brought the photos into the living room and laid them across the table, trying to arrange them in chronological order. Some she recognized, events, settings, even outfits. Others felt like missing pages from a book she'd read once and forgotten. One detail tugged at her: many of the photos had been taken from a distance, through windows, across streets, or from slightly obscured angles. They weren't invasive, but hidden. As if the person behind the lens hadn't wanted to be seen. She pulled out her old memory box, a tin filled with letters, postcards, and bits of life she'd saved over the years. Flipping through it, she stopped at a postcard from 1993, Brighton Pier, with a scribbled note from Henry. Caught a perfect shot of you at the cliffs today. Remind me to show you when we get home. Love, H. Eleanor's heart skipped. Could Henry have taken these photos? The next morning, driven by a sense of unraveling mystery, Eleanor returned to time-worn treasures. The young shop attendant greeted her again with a gentle smile. Back already? Eleanor held up one of the photos, the one of her reading in the park. This camera. Do you remember anything else about where it came from? The woman frowned. It was part of a donation. A man named Colin dropped off boxes from his late aunt's estate. She'd been a hoarder, lots of random things. But the camera was in its own bag. Colin? Eleanor asked. Do you have his contact information? The woman looked hesitant. I shouldn't give that out, technically. Eleanor nodded, understanding. Would you mind passing along my number to him, then? Just say. Someone has questions about a camera his aunt once owned. The woman took her name and contact info with a promise to try. 2 days passed. Eleanor kept the photos by her side, checking her phone every hour. On the third afternoon, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She answered, voice a little breathless. Hello? A man's voice replied. Is this Eleanor Dawson? Yes. My name's Colin. You asked about the camera I donated? That's right. A pause. May I ask why? Eleanor hesitated, then said, because the photos on the film. They're of me. From decades ago. Some of them I've never seen before. Silence stretched across the line. Then Colin said softly, I think we should meet. They met the next morning at a small cafe near the town square. Colin was in his late 40s, soft-spoken, with kind eyes and a faint resemblance to someone Eleanor couldn't quite place. My aunt's name was Lillian, he explained after they sat. She never married, lived alone for most of her life. She was quiet, private, eccentric. Eleanor waited. After she passed, I found stacks of notebooks, journals, and cameras. Dozens of them. She used to take photos, but I didn't know she still had so many old rolls. He looked down at the photo Eleanor had brought, the one of her and Henry at the cliff's edge. I recognize this, Colin said. That's near the Devon coast. I used to visit her cottage there when I was little. Do you know how she could have taken pictures of me? He looked up slowly. I'm not sure she did. But I found something. A journal entry. It mentioned a man named Henry. A photographer. She wrote, he comes by now and then. Quiet man. Carries a camera. Watches the woman with the dark hair like she's the whole sky. I don't think she knows. Eleanor's breath caught. She was writing about Henry, she whispered. Colin nodded. I think he gave her the camera. Or she found it after he passed. She may have kept it, not knowing what was on the film. Eleanor sat in her car for a long time after the meeting. So many answers, and yet more questions. Had Henry been photographing her secretly all along? Capturing their love in stolen frames? And why had he never shown her these images? Maybe he had meant to. Maybe the film had simply been forgotten, or misplaced. Or maybe he was trying to preserve the moments that words couldn't. Eleanor looked again at the photo of them on the cliffs. It was him. The quiet gaze behind the lens. The man who had seen her not just as his wife, but as a story worth remembering. That night, Eleanor wrote to Benjamin. Not a phone call. Not a text. A real letter. She enclosed a copy of the photo of her and Henry dancing barefoot in the kitchen. Your father captured this without me knowing. I think he wanted me to remember the quiet happiness. And now, I want you to have it too. I don't want our memories to fade, Ben. Let's start again, if you're willing. She sealed the envelope with trembling hands, heart full of something new. Not grief. Not regret. But warmth. A flicker of hope. In the coming weeks, Eleanor began organizing the photos into an album, Henry's Secret Lens, she called it. A tribute not just to a husband, but to a love that had endured in silence, in shadow, in silver halide. And one evening, as she placed the last photo, her younger self in the park, sunlight in her hair, she realized. The past had never really left her. It had simply waited. In a forgotten frame. To be seen again. It was on a rainy Thursday that Eleanor received a parcel, small and neatly wrapped, with no return address, just her name written in clean, precise cursive. She turned the box over, puzzled. The only clue was the postmark, London. Carefully, she opened it. Inside lay an old leather-bound notebook, its corners softened by age. On top, a yellowed photograph rested, a candid shot of her laughing on the beach, a scarf whipping in the wind, her hands raised mid-gesture. It had never been developed, until now. The photo took her breath away. She'd been 37 in that picture. Henry had taken her to Brighton for her birthday. She remembered the trip, but not the photo. Yet there it was, evidence of a joy she could almost still feel in her bones. She opened the notebook slowly, her fingers trembling as she turned to the first page. April 17, 1994. I watched her stand at the shoreline this morning. Wind in her hair, eyes squinting against the spray. She looked like something out of a dream I never deserved to wake up from. I didn't take the picture right then. I just watched. Sometimes I think that's enough. But then I remember. Memory is fleeting. So I lifted the lens. Eleanor pressed a hand over her mouth. It was his handwriting. Henry's. The notebook wasn't just a collection of thoughts. It was a private archive, an emotional journal and a photographic ledger, each entry pairing words with descriptions of photos he had taken over the years. Not all the photos had survived. Some had never been developed. But the way he wrote about them gave them life. She laughs at my terrible attempt to make spaghetti. Flour on her cheek. I almost dropped the camera trying to capture it. She reads beside the window, sunlight pooling around her like gold. Doesn't notice me. I hope she never does. The quiet is perfect. Eleanor devoured each entry as though it were food, nourishment for a heart she hadn't realized was starving. Page after page, she saw herself through Henry's eyes, moments of tenderness, of conflict, of beauty. She cried when she found one dated only a month before his death. I can feel the weight in my chest again. She brushes off my wheezing like it's nothing, still worrying over the garden bulbs. I want to tell her I'm scared, but instead I lift the lens one last time. Just in case. She turns and sees me. Smiles. Click. Eleanor closed the book and held it to her chest, sobbing. It was as if Henry had reached across time, past the silence of his absence, to speak one last truth. I never stopped seeing you. Later that evening, she sat at her dining table, photos spread around her, notebook open, and a fresh stack of letter paper in front of her. There was something she needed to do. With a steady hand, Eleanor began to write. Dear Benjamin. I've made many mistakes as a mother. Too many silences. Too much pride. I think I've spent the last decade hiding from grief and mistaking that for strength. Your father. He left me something. A gift I didn't know he was making, photographs, journal entries, memories he captured quietly so I could remember us the way we really were. Not just the pain at the end. But the joy, the laughter, the way we danced barefoot in the kitchen. I want to share it with you. All of it. Because you're part of that story too. Please come visit. With all my love. Mom. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. When Eleanor opened the door, she found Benjamin standing there, holding an overnight bag and a bundle of autumn flowers. His hair was thinner than she remembered, his eyes more tired, but they were still her son's eyes. They stared at each other for a long moment. I got your letter, he said finally. Eleanor nodded. I wasn't sure if you would. I wasn't sure either, he said, his voice cracking slightly. But I'm glad I did. She stepped aside, and he entered the house he hadn't set foot in for nearly 6 years. The visit was tentative at first. Small talk, cups of tea, glances around the living room at old photos. Then, Eleanor brought out the notebook and the envelope of developed photographs. Benjamin sat down beside her on the couch, flipping through them in stunned silence. Did Dad take all these? He did, Eleanor said softly. Most without me knowing. He wrote about them, too. Benjamin opened the notebook and began to read, his mouth moving silently with the words. After a few pages, he paused, swallowed hard, and looked at her. He loved you so much. I know, she whispered, tears spilling. And I forgot how to carry that love after he was gone. Benjamin reached over and took her hand. I did too, he admitted. I think I blamed you for how things fell apart after. I didn't know how to process it. I still don't. But we can try, Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. Together. That weekend, they went through the photos one by one, matching them to Henry's journal entries, laughing at his dry humor and quiet sentimentality. They cooked together, roast chicken and vegetables, Henry's old favorite, and ate by candlelight like Eleanor and Henry used to. Benjamin asked if he could take the notebook back to London for a while. I'd like to scan the entries, he said. Maybe make a small book. For the girls to know who their grandfather really was. Eleanor nodded. I'd like that. A week later, Eleanor received a photo via text. It was a picture of her 2 granddaughters sitting on the couch in Benjamin's flat, flipping through Henry's journal. A copy of the seaside photo was framed on the wall behind them. Beneath the image, Benjamin had written. They're calling it Grandpa's secret love story. Eleanor laughed aloud, tears of joy brimming in her eyes. She looked up at the wall, at her framed version of that same photo. The one taken with the forgotten camera. And for the first time in years, she whispered aloud into the quiet room. Thank you, Henry. The light was fading outside, and Eleanor stood at her window, watching the golden dusk settle over the hedgerows. But she didn't feel lonely anymore. She felt full. Alive. Seen. Because in the space between each shutter click, in the quiet love of a man who chose to document the world through her smile, Henry had left her a gift that transcended time. And in rediscovering it, she had found her way back. To her family. To herself. To the light between the shadows. Winter descended upon Devonshire slowly, like a breath held before a long exhale. The trees stood bare now, their branches etched against pale skies, and the fields outside Eleanor Dawson's cottage shimmered with frost each morning. But inside her home, warmth returned, not just from the fire crackling in the hearth, but from something far deeper. Connection. Restoration. Love. It had been several weeks since Benjamin's visit, but their rekindled bond had only grown stronger. They spoke every few days, sometimes about life, sometimes about Henry, sometimes about nothing at all. But it didn't matter. It was the effort that counted. The presence. And something else had bloomed too, a steady stream of letters. It began when Eleanor mailed one to her childhood friend Hilda, tucked inside a Christmas card, along with a photo Henry had taken decades earlier of the two of them at a summer fair, cotton candy in hand, mid-laugh. It was Hilda who responded with a long, handwritten letter and an invitation to meet for tea after the holidays. The next letter was to her niece Claire, her sister's daughter, whom she hadn't spoken to in almost 10 years due to a family squabble Eleanor no longer remembered the root of. In the envelope, Eleanor placed another of Henry's secret photographs, Claire as a girl, playing in the garden with Eleanor's cat, Moonbeam. Her reply arrived within a week, warm, tearful, and full of longing. One by one, the people Eleanor thought she had lost began to return to her life, not in grand gestures, but in gentle flickers. It was as if Henry's photos had become keys to doors long sealed shut. Eleanor decided she would not keep the photographs hidden anymore. She would make an album. Not just for herself or for Benjamin, but for anyone who needed to remember what love looked like in quiet moments. She called it the Album of Us. Each page paired one of Henry's photographs with an excerpt from his journal. On the opposite side, Eleanor wrote her own reflections, memories from that day, the feelings she remembered, or didn't, the way her thoughts about that moment had evolved with time. One spread showed a photo of her younger self reading on a sun-drenched windowsill. Henry's note, "She hasn't moved in an hour. I think she loves the book more than me. But I don't mind, she glows when she reads." Eleanor's reflection, "It was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And yes, I was utterly enchanted. But what I remember more now is the warmth of the sun. And how I felt completely safe in that house, with you humming in the kitchen." Another page held a grainy shot of Henry peeking from behind a garden fence, grinning as if caught in the act. "Henry, she said the new flower bed would never survive. I planted it anyway. Just wait until spring. Eleanor, the roses bloomed so wildly that year, I had to eat my words. You always had more faith in life than I did." The album grew slowly, steadily. Every page a window. Every memory a bridge. One morning, Eleanor stood in her attic, opening a dusty trunk filled with old greeting cards and forgotten trinkets. She was looking for something special, an item to place on the final page of the album. She didn't expect to find the envelope. It was addressed in Henry's handwriting. To Eleanor, for another time. Inside was a single photograph. A Polaroid. The photo was faded, but unmistakable. It showed a room bathed in golden light. Eleanor sat in an armchair, her hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. Henry knelt beside her, his head resting against her side, eyes closed. It was the day they'd found out they were expecting Benjamin. Eleanor gasped. She didn't remember Henry taking that photo. She didn't remember seeing it before at all. She turned the image over. On the back, Henry had written, "In case I don't get to say it enough, this is when I knew. This is when I fell in love with both of you at once." Eleanor clutched the photo to her chest and cried. Not out of sadness, but out of awe. Because after all this time, even in death, Henry had found a way to be present. The final page of the album held that Polaroid. She didn't write a reflection. She didn't need to. The photo said everything. At Christmas, Benjamin returned with his daughters in tow. They brought gifts and noise and laughter, the kind that filled the entire cottage like rising bread. Eleanor was nervous at first. She hadn't seen the girls, Lucy and Emma, since they were toddlers. But the moment they ran up and hugged her, calling her Granny Elle, she melted. They played board games. They made gingerbread houses. They looked through photo albums, and Eleanor shared stories about each image. But when they reached the album of us, the room grew quieter. The girls flipped the pages slowly, asking questions, giggling at the fashion, pointing at their young father and marveling at how different he looked. At one point, Lucy looked up and asked, "Did Grandpa love taking pictures more than anything?" Eleanor smiled. "No, sweetheart. He loved us. Taking pictures was just how he remembered." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Eleanor sat by the fire with Benjamin. The album rested between them. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For showing me a version of Dad I never really knew. For reminding me of who you are. Of who we all were." Eleanor nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I think I forgot, too," she whispered. "Until I saw it again." Before he left, Benjamin handed her a wrapped gift. "Open it after we're gone," he said with a wink. When the house was quiet again, she sat in her chair and unwrapped it. Inside was a camera. A new one. Digital. Compact. And beneath it, a note. "For your turn, Mom. Start capturing the light you see now. With love. Ben." Eleanor held the camera carefully, her fingers curling around it with reverence. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the pale winter morning. Somewhere in the distance, the first bird sang. And Eleanor, smiling, lifted the camera. And clicked. The first photo Eleanor took with her new camera was a modest one, an image of the frost-covered garden just outside her kitchen window, the soft morning light touching the hedgerows like fingertips on parchment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't perfect. But it was hers. And for the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt like she wasn't just looking backward, she was looking forward. The days that followed carried a quiet magic. She brought the camera with her on walks, snapping pictures of bare trees reflected in puddles, steam rising from mugs of tea, the crinkled smile of the shopkeeper at the corner bakery. She sent these photos to Benjamin and the girls, who would reply with photos of their own. Lucy had a knack for catching animals mid-blink. Emma preferred taking pictures of odd shadows and cloud shapes. Eleanor started a small email thread with them called What We Saw Today, and every few days, the inbox filled with fresh little visions from their lives. A new connection, forged not through obligation, but through shared perspective. Eleanor also found herself reconnecting with people she hadn't thought of in years. She mailed a photo of the old churchyard to her former neighbor, Nora, now living in Bath. With it, she included a note reminiscing about their Sunday strolls and garden gossip. She sent a photo of the seaside to a cousin in Wales she hadn't seen since her wedding. Some people didn't reply. But many did. And in every response was a little thread, weaving her back into the lives she had once let fray. One chilly afternoon, Eleanor was sitting by the fire, thumbing through the album of us once more, when she noticed something she hadn't before. On the last page, the page where Henry's final Polaroid rested, there was a faint imprint on the back cover, like something had been pressed there long ago. She carefully lifted the album's lining and discovered, tucked beneath the paper, a folded note. A second message. Henry's handwriting again, slightly more rushed this time, slightly more faded. My dearest Eleanor. If you found this, it means the photos found their way back to you. I can only hope they brought you warmth. I never meant to keep them from you, just couldn't bear the thought of you seeing them without me there to explain. Without me there at all. So I buried them in time, thinking maybe you'd never need them. But if you do, if grief ever becomes too quiet to fight, then maybe these glimpses will help you hear me again. I've watched you life with grace, even in silence. You are the love of my life, the light that taught me to see, and the voice that taught me to listen. And if this world lets us meet again in another one, I'll find you. I'll know your laugh. Your eyes. I'll take your photo once more and tell you I never stopped seeing you. Love always. Eleanor sat still for a long while, the letter pressed against her heart, tears warm and unhurried as they slid down her cheeks. There was nothing more she needed to hear. Nothing more to regret. Only the echo of a love that never left. That spring, Eleanor launched a local photo exhibit in the Chisbury Town Hall. She called it The Light We Keep. It featured a blend of Henry's rediscovered photographs and her own new ones. Black and white portraits sat beside vibrant digital prints. Her captions included bits of their journals, snippets of her letters, and short reflections on love, loss, and memory. Visitors wept openly. Strangers lingered in front of the images, their own stories stirring beneath the surface. Teenagers came with cameras. Widows came with handkerchiefs. Children pointed at photos of old bicycles and ice cream cones and said, "That looks like ours." And Eleanor, sitting in a corner chair with a thermos of tea and a smile on her face, watched the gallery fill not with ghosts, but with life. By the time summer arrived, the exhibit had drawn visitors from neighboring towns. The local paper ran a piece about it titled "Photographs of a Life Lived Quietly, Loved Deeply." An editor from a small publishing house reached out, asking if she would consider compiling the album and reflections into a book. Eleanor declined, kindly. Some things, she decided, were meant to be felt in person. Some echoes should remain soft, close to the heart. But she allowed the photographs to remain in the town hall long after the official exhibit ended. She wanted people to see what love looked like in real life, not just in movies or novels, but in the glance across a breakfast table, the unspoken hug, the last handwritten note. On the one-year anniversary of Henry's passing, Eleanor returned to the seaside cliff where the most iconic photo had been taken, the one of them in the wind, wrapped around each other, laughing like the world didn't matter. She brought a camera. Not to mourn, but to mark the moment. She set it up on a timer, stood at the cliff's edge, and looked out over the sea. The wind lifted her silver hair gently, and in that moment, she smiled, not for the camera, but for the man who had taught her to see the beauty in everyday things. Click. Later, when she developed the image, she would title it, "Still Here." Back at home that night, Eleanor lit a candle and wrote her final note in the album of us. Grief does not end. It quiets. It softens. But it lingers. So does love. Henry didn't leave me empty. He left me full, of memories, of glimpses, of warmth. He left me the light to follow back to myself. And now, I will carry that light forward. In photos. In letters. In laughter. And one day, when I am no longer here, maybe someone will find these photos in an old camera and know. Love leaves echoes that never truly fade. She closed the album. Placed it back on the shelf beside the framed photo of Henry. And as she blew out the candle, the room dimmed, but never darkened. Because the echo remained. And it always would.